Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fundamental chapter in biology, respiration in plants. We so often think of plants just as these passive oxygen producers, right? But their internal life is actually this incredibly complex, bustling economy of energy exchange.
So, let's kick things off with a bit of a curveball. Without lungs, without gills, do plants actually breathe? I mean, we all know they take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, but what about the rest of the time?
Well, the short answer is yes, absolutely. Just like us, they literally need oxygen to survive. They use it to break down complex molecules, like glucose, step by step. And their strategy here is completely crucial. Instead of one giant, wasteful bonfire where all the energy just escapes as heat, plants carefully capture that released energy in small, manageable increments.
It's basically a massive currency exchange. The cell takes these large, complex glucose molecules and converts them into highly functional pocket change energy known as ATP. And that ATP is the energy currency that pays for pretty much every single activity happening inside the plant cell.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Do plants breathe? 2. Glycolysis. 3. Fermentation. 4. Aerobic respiration. 5. The energy balance sheet. And finally, 6. The amphibolic pathway. We're going to follow the journey of a single glucose molecule from the moment it splits right up to its transformation into cellular fuel.
Let's start with section 1. Do plants actually breathe? We need to clear up how plant gas exchange actually works on a physical level. It's actually wild to think about how plants get away without having complex respiratory systems. Unlike us with our lungs and our circulatory system, practically every leaf, stem, and root just manages its own oxygen needs locally. Plus, they respire at way lower rates than animals do. And because their cells are packed so loosely, gases can just diffuse right through these interconnected air spaces. Oh, and during the day, leaves are literally generating their own oxygen locally through photosynthesis anyway.
Moving right along to section 2, glycolysis, or splitting the sugar. With the oxygen access all sorted out, let's track our glucose molecule as it enters the cytoplasm.
Before getting bogged down in the complex biochemistry, the main thing to remember is that glycolysis is exactly what it sounds like, a splitting process. It takes a nice, stable 6-carbon glucose sugar, invests a tiny bit of energy to destabilize it, and basically snaps it in half into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvic acid.
When you look at the actual scientific pathway, it's this meticulous 10-step chain of reactions. And notice how the cell actually has to consume 2 ATPs right off the bat as an investment. You got to spend money to make money, right? But it eventually pays us back at the bottom of the chain with 4 ATPs plus some high-energy carrier molecules called NADH. So it's a small net profit, but a totally necessary first step. Which brings us to section 3, fermentation, or surviving without oxygen. See, glycolysis happens whether oxygen is there or not. But what happens next to that pyruvic acid if the cell is suddenly stuck in an environment with 0 oxygen?
Well, under those anaerobic conditions, organisms face a pretty hazardous choice. To keep the glycolysis engine running, they absolutely have to recycle their chemical carriers. So animal muscle cells might reduce that pyruvic acid into lactic acid, which, by the way, is exactly why your muscles burn during heavy sprint. Meanwhile, organisms like yeast, they convert it into carbon dioxide and ethanol alcohol. But in both cases, the energy yield is super low, and those byproducts can actually become toxic to the organism.
All right, let's get back to ideal conditions. Section 4, aerobic respiration, the mitochondrial engine. Oxygen is present, and our molecule is entering the powerhouse of the cell.
If the cell wants the real energetic jackpot, it has to completely strip away all the hydrogen atoms from our pyruvic acid. It's going to dismantle the molecule, carbon by carbon, until there is literally nothing left but the carbon dioxide that we exhale.
And this systematic dismantling happens right here in the Krebs cycle. It's this continuous, cyclic pathway buried deep inside the mitochondrial matrix. Our molecule enters, and through a series of steps, it's methodically broken apart. But get this. The real goal here isn't actually making ATP directly. The goal is to extract high-energy electrons and load them onto carrier molecules like NADH and FADH2. Because here's where the real magic happens. Those stripped electrons we just loaded up, they are the true treasure.
They're going to be used to power a specialized gradient that pumps out just incredible amounts of usable energy.
Over in the inner mitochondrial membrane in the electron transport system, those loaded electrons literally bounce through protein complexes. And as they drop in energy, they pump protons across the membrane, creating this massive pressure gradient. Then, those protons rush back through a microscopic turbine called ATP synthase, physically spinning it to mass-produce ATP. And right at the very end of the chain, oxygen is waiting to catch those exhausted electrons, safely forming water.
So Section 5, the energy balance sheet. We've seen the chemistry, now let's check the ultimate scoreboard for these two strategies. If a cell relies purely on fermentation without any oxygen, the net gain from breaking down one single glucose molecule is just 2 ATP. 2! It's a survival mechanism for sure, but you're definitely not thriving on that.
But if you turn on that full aerobic respiration engine, utilizing the Krebs cycle and the electron transport system, that number jumps to a staggering theoretical net gain of 38 ATP molecules per glucose. Oxygen is essentially acting as the ultimate biochemical magnet, pulling this massively efficient process forward.
Which leads us to Section 6, a paradigm shift with the amphibolic pathway. Get ready to kind of flip how we view this whole respiratory process we just walked through.
Up until now, we've talked about respiration like it's purely destructive, right? Catabolism. Taking big things and smashing them down. But modern biology recognizes that it's actually amphibolic. This means the pathway is a two-way street. Yes, it breaks things down for energy, but it also provides the exact essential building blocks needed to create new cellular materials.
These pathways are just incredibly interconnected. If a plant needs to burn fats or proteins for energy, they just enter the respiratory pathway at various intermediate stages. But the real genius is that if the organism has excess energy and needs to build new fats or proteins, it can withdraw those exact same intermediates straight out of the Krebs cycle or glycolysis to synthesize them.
Wrapping up our biochemical journey here, we have to look at the respiratory quotient. The type of fuel a plant or animal uses actually changes its gas exchange ratio. Because carbohydrates already have plenty of oxygen baked into their structure, they yield a perfect 1-to-1 ratio of oxygen consumed to carbon dioxide released. But fats have very little oxygen, so burning them consumes way more environmental oxygen than it releases as CO2.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely fascinating thought to ponder. If biological systems are so perfectly adapted to burn fats and proteins, and can seamlessly feed them right into that mitochondrial engine, why did life evolve to favor glucose as its absolute primary fuel source across almost all kingdoms of life? It's a real testament to the incredible optimized efficiency of the chemical pathways we've explored today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning and stay curious.